A ruling by the Federal High Court has now clarified where one of Nigeria's most high-profile detainees will remain, while legal proceedings continue. On Monday, the court struck out an application seeking the transfer of Nnamdi Kanu from the Sokoto Correctional Center to Abuja. The decision means that for now, the correctional authorities will retain discretion over his place of detention. This ruling is not about guilt or innocence, and it does not determine the outcome of the substantive appeal already before the Supreme Court. Instead, it raises important legal questions about correctional discretion, access to counsel, and how courts balance security considerations with fair trial rights. So the key question we need to examine is this: what does the court's refusal to order a transfer mean in law, and what implications does it have for ongoing legal proceedings? The Federal High Court in Abuja struck out the application filed by Kanu's legal team, which asked that he be transferred from Sokoto to Abuja. The matter was heard and determined by Justice James Omotosho. In his ruling, the judge held that the request lacked merit and declined to issue any directive to the Nigerian Correctional Service regarding where the detainee should be held. The court agreed with the federal government's argument that decisions on the place of detention of a convicted person fall within the administrative discretion of correctional authorities, provided the facility is lawful and secure. Justice Omotosho noted that inconvenience to legal counsel or logistical challenges associated with travel do not, on their own, override security considerations or correctional discretion. However, the court directed that the detainee must be granted reasonable access to his legal representatives in line with established administrative procedures. This application came after a major shift in the status of the case. In November 2025, the court delivered a judgment imposing a life imprisonment sentence, placing Kanu formally under the custody of the Nigerian Correctional Service. Following that judgment, the case moved from active trial proceedings into the post-conviction phase, where issues such as appeals and detention conditions become more prominent. The transfer application was filed against this background, with the defense arguing that continued detention in Sokoto created practical difficulties for legal consultation and appeal preparation. At the same time, the substantive appeal against the conviction is already pending before the Supreme Court. This timing matters because courts are generally more cautious about interfering with correctional administration once a lawful conviction has been entered. The threshold for judicial intervention becomes significantly higher. The real issue in this ruling is therefore not the physical location of detention, but the scope of judicial authority versus administrative discretion. Under Nigerian law, courts determine guilt, sentence, and the legality of detention. Once a lawful sentence has been imposed, however, day-to-day custody decisions are typically vested in the Nigerian Correctional Service. The court's refusal to order a transfer reflects this division of responsibility. Justice Omotosho's approach suggests that unless detention conditions are unlawful or unconstitutional, courts are reluctant to substitute their judgment for that of correctional administrators. This does not mean access to legal representation is unimportant. Rather, the court appears to have taken the view that access can be protected without directing where a detainee must be held. In simple terms, the ruling draws a line. Courts protect rights, but they do not manage prisons. This decision affects more than the individual involved. For convicted persons and detainees nationwide, it reinforces the principle that correctional authorities retain control over placement once detention is lawful. For defense lawyers, it sets a clear expectation that logistical difficulty alone may not be sufficient grounds for courts to intervene in custody decisions. For the Nigerian Correctional Service, the judgment affirms administrative discretion while also reminding the service of its obligation to provide reasonable access to legal counsel. The ruling also clarifies the judiciary's role, drawing boundaries around how far courts will go in supervising post-conviction detention. For the wider public, it helps explain how legal rights are exercised after conviction, distinguishing between constitutional protections and administrative convenience. At the same time, several questions remain unanswered. The ruling does not clearly define how reasonable access to legal counsel will be ensured in practical terms, leaving room for administrative interpretation. There is also limited discussion of health considerations, as the court did not set out specific safeguards or reporting obligations regarding medical care. Oversight mechanisms are another unresolved area. While correctional authority is affirmed, the ruling does not explain how disputes over access or treatment should be reviewed if they arise. Finally, no timelines were addressed. As long as the substantive appeal remains pending, uncertainty around access and logistics will continue. For ordinary Nigerians, this ruling highlights how the justice system balances rights and administration after a conviction. Many people assume courts control every aspect of detention, but this decision clarifies that certain decisions move from the courtroom to correctional authorities once a lawful sentence is imposed. The case reinforces the importance of process. Legal rights continue after conviction, but they are exercised within defined administrative frameworks rather than personal convenience. For the public, the broader concern is consistency, that legal processes are followed predictably, without special treatment or arbitrary decisions. As the transfer issue settles, attention now turns to what happens next. Observers will be watching how access to legal counsel is implemented in practice and whether visits and consultations are facilitated smoothly. The progress of the substantive appeal before the Supreme Court will be critical, as that appeal, not the transfer request, will ultimately determine the future of the conviction. Judicial consistency will also matter. How similar applications are treated in future cases will show whether this ruling becomes a broader precedent. Administrative transparency will be another key factor, as clear communication around detention conditions can prevent renewed disputes or further litigation. This ruling ultimately draws a clear line between judicial authority and correctional administration. The court did not close the door on legal rights. Instead, it clarified where those rights are enforced and by whom, after conviction. What matters going forward is not the location of detention, but whether access to counsel, medical care, and due process are respected within the existing legal framework. As the substantive appeal proceeds, the key question remains: will the safeguards outlined by the court be implemented effectively in practice, or will further legal challenges emerge from how the ruling is applied? That answer will shape the next phase of this case.